Today I'm going to share with you 10 lessons that I learnt running my first 100k ultramarathon. Let's get to it. Lesson number 1. Have a clear why and purpose to your first ultramarathon. Having a greater purpose than just wanting to finish your first ultramarathon will help you get through those difficult times. And there will be some of those.
This is definitely a sufferfest.
For me, it was running in memory of my dad and also to raise money for the Alzheimer's Society. Both reasons were too big for me not to finish. Also, when you're raising money for a cause that is close to your heart, you don't want to let down those people who have contributed as well to this cause. Another reason to finish the race, even if it's getting difficult. So the lesson is, make the reason not just about your own aspirations to finish your first ultramarathon. Lesson number 2, enjoy the process. There are many negative things that you can focus on when training or running an ultramarathon.
Just having to walk this bit. Calves tightened up quite a lot, a bit painful. I'm just seeing if I can walk it off.
But it's important to enjoy the process. When training, change your routes. Get others involved in your training. Make some of your longer runs an adventure. Visit new places. And enjoying the process doesn't have to stop when you're running the event.
Views of an ultra runner. If you're going to stop, you've got to stop for a pig. There we go.
Lesson number 3, plan, remembering the details. My old lecturer used to say, remember the 6 P's. Perfect planning prevents piss poor performance. Now because of this, I was pretty good at my planning. I made sure that my trainers were okay, I trained in them, I made sure socks were good, checked my pack out, all the kit that I needed for the day I trained with. I looked at my nutrition. I thought I was perfect in my planning. However, on the day I added a couple of different things to my pack. One of them was a waterproof container which I put some plasters in, and the noise from that container with my plasters jumping around nearly drove me crazy, and I had to stop and get the plasters out of the container.
5.5 miles in, feeling okay.
So remember the details. They can often make a big difference when you're running a long distance. Lesson number 4, plan your nutrition. You should plan your nutrition both for your ultra and for your training. For the ultra, I trained on the types of foods that didn't upset my stomach and that could digest easily. I also looked at the types of fluid and the amount of fluid I would need to take in, and these included carb drinks, electrolyte drinks, plain water, things that would allow me to be able to perform on the day. And I trained with all of those sorts of things. The one thing I didn't do was I didn't pay attention or enough attention to what I was taking in on a daily basis. And because of this, I lost a lot of weight, probably too much. Now I've always eaten fairly clean, but what I didn't do was I didn't pay enough attention to the added calories that I needed. In fact, my scales were indicating that I'd gone from 14% fat content to 5%. Although my scales, or any scales for that matter, are not as accurate as you would like, going from 14% fat content to 5% fat content was not a good indicator. I now make sure that if a session has burnt 400 or 500 calories, I replace those calories immediately after the run, rather than leaving it to chance. And this is in addition to the normal daily meals that I have. Lesson number 5. Don't think that you have to run an ultra distance in training to complete an ultra marathon. Now before I started training for my ultra marathon, I hadn't even run a marathon, and so I made sure that I'd run a marathon first. But due to probably inexperience and lack of confidence, I still felt I needed to run a distance greater than a marathon in training. And so I ran a 30-mile training run. No taper, just as part of my training. Now this was a mistake. The weeks after, I felt sore, I felt tired, and in fact had to have a couple of days off I'd lost sight of the context of the run. And in fact, it didn't do my confidence any good, because when I'd completed the 30 miles, I was extremely tired, and I was thinking to myself, I've got to run 62 miles. How am I going to do that? You don't have to run those ultra distances in training. You have to think of the whole context of your week, of your training. Now, I would not do any more than 22 miles in one session, and I'd incorporate some other methods, such as the run-walk method, made popular by Jeff Calloway, called Jeffing. Doing too much or too little in your training is something you just have to work out for yourselves. But I would suggest you don't have to run an ultra marathon in training. Lesson number 6, don't just run. Don't just run to prepare for your first ultra. I did tempo runs, I did long runs, I did interval work, I foam rolled, but the one thing I didn't do was I didn't do enough strength work. I thought being on my feet running distances would be enough. Although it goes a long way into preparing you for an ultra, what I did find was during the event I was never stretched in terms of cardiovascular, but my legs became extremely sore. Coming downhill, going uphill, and being on your feet for that amount of time really challenges the strength endurance in your legs. Now I include specific leg exercises, not only to prepare for the event, but also to help avoid injury. Lesson number 7, recovery. Now sleep is so important in your recovery. I got about 7.5 hours every week and then 8 hours at the weekend. Now in order to get 7.5 hours, I needed to be in bed for at least 8 hours. Because if you've got a tracker, you'll notice that it's not how long you're in bed for, and getting good quality sleep is really important. So some of the things that I did when training for my first ultra, I stopped looking at screens an hour before bedtime. I also found that going to bed a little earlier and having a read also helped, although when you are training hard, there's very little difficulty in getting to sleep quickly. Cutting out caffeine in the afternoon and the evening was also important. Stretching has always been important to me. However, the longer distances that you run, the greater you need to stretch in order to recover those muscles. I could have done more in this area, using the time whilst I was watching TV to stretch or foam roll. Nutrition, which I mentioned in lesson 4, is another key milestone for your recovery protocol. Lesson number 8, engage with other runners whilst you're running your first ultramarathon. During my first ultramarathon, I found that when I got into a conversation with another athlete, those miles would just clip by, and before you know it, you'd already run 10 miles. I'd enjoyed a conversation with a guy who had run the Marathon des Sables, and he was telling me about all his experiences. I also was able to talk to other people and their reasons for running the ultramarathon. For some of them, it was their first ultramarathon. For others, they'd done many of them, and I was able to gain a lot of experience just by chatting with them, and it helped me to get through those difficult miles. Lesson number 9, be strategic. Don't be afraid to walk, but be strategic with it. In training, I was able to discover the types of gradients that I could run and the types of gradients that I definitely should walk, as it was not worth the energy expenditure. Putting your hands on your knees or using poles when the gradient is too steep also helps. One of the mistakes I did make, probably getting a little bit overexcited, is I began to run those downhills a little too much, freewheeling, and then finding myself getting too fast and having to brake a little bit, which can often blow your thighs out. So it's really important to take those steep downhill sections very carefully so that you don't brake too much and make those thighs really sore at the end of it. Lesson number 10, adaptability. The very nature of an ultra race is that things can change in an instant. I trained for 100k in the height of summer, so I was expecting it to be really hot. I had 2 500ml water bottles, one with a carb drink, one with electrolytes, and I also had a full camelback filled with just over a litre of water. I also planned on changing my shoes at 50k because I'd read and heard that people's feet will often swell. However, the day wasn't as hot as I'd expected, and I ended up ditching the camelback in the first aid station. And also the aid stations were so good I really didn't need it. And as for changing my trainers at 50k, when I arrived at the 50k aid station, my feet felt fine. I changed my socks, but I kept the same trainers because I thought to myself, why change things when it was working? Now, if I was to do an event which was longer than 100k, maybe 100 miles, then I would certainly have a pair of trainers that had a bigger toe box or were slightly bigger in some way, because I did find at the end of 100k my feet were a little bit swollen, and if I'd have taken my trainers off I probably wouldn't have been able to get them back on again. So don't be afraid to change your plans. A good ultra runner is a good problem solver. I hope these tips help, and please share in the comments if you're training for an ultra, particularly if it's your first one, or if you've got any additional tips that you can share. Keep running, and I'll see you in the next one.